The Pavillon de Flore, known then as the Great River Pavilion, or the pavilion at the end of the gallery, joined the Tuileries Palace to the new Riverside Gallery, which under King Henry IV united the Tuileries Palace and the Louvre Palace. Its design is attributed, like the west end of the Great Gallery, to the architect Jacques-Androuet II du Cerceau. It is now known as the Pavillon de Flore, after the Ballet de Flore, the court ballet performed in 1669 in the Grand Salon there, in which King Louis XIV danced for the last time. That name is, however, not found in writing until 1727. The salon itself was turned into apartments in 1716, not long after Louis's death. From 1787 to 1792, the Pavillon de Flore housed the ground floor offices of the Princesse de Lamballe, beside the apartments of Marie Antoinette, which were on the ground floor of the main buildings of the Tuileries. The first floor contained the apartments of Madame Elisabeth, the sister of Louis XVI. After their execution, the pavillon, then known as the Pavillon de l'Égalité, was the meeting place of several committees of the revolutionary government. From the 2nd of October 1804 to April 1805, Pope Pius VII stayed there when he was in Paris for the coronation of Napoleon I. The Pavillon de Flore stood out from the buildings next to it because it was 1 story higher, and higher than the whole of the Tuileries. The pilasters of the colossal order, spanning the ground and first floors, united it to the buildings on either side. As it was a corner pavilion, only 2 sides were visible, the west side, facing the Tuileries Gardens, and the south side, flanking the River Seine. The west side consisted of 3 stories. Each story had 6 windows, divided on the first 2 stories by 4 colossal pilasters into 3 pairs of windows. Although the windows on each of the 3 floors were all the same shape, high and rectangular, their bases were different, and their surrounds were differently decorated. The windows on the ground floor were topped by pediments, the outer 4 triangular, the inner 2 curved. This pattern matches the alternation of curved and triangular pediments at the top of both sides of the west end of the Grand Gallery. On the first floor, the windows were surrounded by carved decoration, topped at the sides by volutes. On the second floor, the windows were more obviously framed, the frames being decorated at the top by 3 enlarged voussoirs. At this level, the colossal order pilasters have been replaced by 1-story pilasters. Above the outer windows of the second floor were 2 dormer windows arched at the top and crowned by triangular pediments. In the middle, a pair of similar windows was topped by a carved and perved pediment. On the riverside, there were only 5 bays, containing 4 windows similarly shaped to those on the west side. Only 1 window was between the outer pilasters. 2 windows, separated by a niche for a statue, were between the inner pilasters. On the ground floor, the outer windows had triangular pediments, the inner windows curved pediments, and the smaller niche a triangular pediment. Again, this matched the alternation of pediments on the long gallery. On the first floor, the windows had stone frameworks, and the niche had a curved pediment. On the second floor, the windows had slightly different stone frameworks, and the niche had a triangular pediment. The colossal pilasters of the floor below gave way to 1-story pilasters. At roof level, the pilasters were topped by stone urns, and the 3 central bays were crowned with 2 square panels flanking a longer carved panel, the whole carrying a curved and carved pediment. By the time of the Second Empire, on both fronts, the windows had had shutters added, and on the first and second floors some windows had been divided into 2. The roof had a more obviously flat top, and more dormer windows and chimneys had been added. On the riverside, the niches contained no statues. And then, in 1861, the dilapidation of the western end of the Grande Galerie and of the Pavillon de Flore were announced to be advanced and irreparable. They were both demolished, the adjoining end of the Grande Galerie first, and then they were rebuilt, the Pavillon de Flore first. They were rebuilt according to the designs of the architect Hector Lefuel, who, like others, deplored the bad taste of the colossal order. The rebuilding took place from 1864 to 1868. The western Tuileries Gardens façade of the Pavillon de Flore, in Hector Lefuel's new design, has the 3 central bays grouped together, projecting slightly forward from the 2 outer bays. The corners of the building are rusticated. A basement level is largely hidden from view. The ground floor has 5 arched windows, the arch emphasized by stonework and by the prominent keystone carved with a face, whose headdress extends into the stonework above. 3 balconies, 1 each for the outer windows and 1 for the 3 inner windows, are supported by lions' heads. The lion's head is also a central part of the balcony's grilles. On the first and second floors there are 5 tall rectangular windows. The 3 central windows are separated from each other by columns. They are separated from the 2 outer windows by carved rectangular plaques, defined by pairs of flat pilasters. The 3 central windows are also recessed, which allows them to have a small balcony each, protected, as on other floors, by an ironwork grille. An attic story above the second floor has 5 square windows. The 3 central windows are separated by statues of sentinels by Jules Cavelier. These 3 windows are separated from the outer attic windows by 2 rectangles of stone flanked by flat pilasters. Rich carving, covering the corners, takes the place of rustication at the attic level. A cornice tops this level, supporting, over the outer windows, the appearance of a balustrade, which carries a stone urn at each corner. From the central 3-bay projection springs a curved broken pediment. Between the 2 parts of this pediment arises a wall carrying 3 circular windows, each topped with a carving bearing the letter N. Carved cupids with palm fronds sit over the upper half of these round windows, supporting a curved pediment bearing a group of statuary also by Jules Cavelier. The narrow sides of 2 tall chimneys rise from behind the broken pediment. Lefuel's riverside façade is similar to the west façade, but has only 4 bays. The 2 central bays project forwards like the 3 central bays on the west façade. The ground floor windows also resemble those on the west façade. On the first and second floors, the 2 central windows are separated by a carved panel, flanked by pilasters which bear a curved pediment. Between the attic windows is the best known of the sculptures of the pavilion, Jean-Baptiste Carpeau's group of the Triumph of Flora. Above the top curved pediment is Carpeau's Imperial France, bringing light to the world and protecting science, agriculture and industry. Behind this group rises the narrow side of a chimney. The east side of the Pavillon de Flore has no façade, as it is joined to the west end of the Grande Galerie. It does, however, have a pediment, difficult to see and rarely photographed. It is just visible in the drawing by William Wilde. The pediment represents an imperial eagle standing on a globe, no doubt the globe of the earth, grasping it with predatory talons. On each side of the globe, a heavily muscled male sits in the shelter of the eagle's wings, drawing over his head a cloth or cloak, while the other hand rests on the horn of a bearded mask, which adorns the end of the two volutes which close the curves of the broken pediment. Each side of the pediment and of the chimney which backs it is supported by two carved infants. Beside the Pavillon de Flore, at the entrance to the Tuileries Gardens on the riverside, Lefuel placed two female sphinxes. They had been part of the spoils of the Crimean War in 1855, taken from the entrance to the Naval Library in Sebastopol. They were placed here in 1867, after being kept out of sight during the state visit to France of the Tsar Alexander II earlier that year. The sphinxes had to be moved again when the street between the palace and the gardens, closed by the garden designer Le Nôtre in the 17th century, was reopened in 1877 as the Rue des Tuileries, now renamed after General Lemonnier. As the eye travels up the facades of the Pavillon de Flore, decoration and sculpture become more and more florid, perhaps excessively so. It may be thought that the building therefore looks top-heavy. The riverside facade of the Grande Galerie, next to the Pavillon de Flore, was transformed by Lefuel. As elsewhere, he got rid of the colossal order of pilasters. He introduced a design closer to Métézo's at the eastern end of the gallery, which had been renovated by Duban under the Second Empire. Lefuel's design was, however, simpler. Lefuel kept the alternating triangular and curved pediments, with sculptures within and separated by chimneys. But under the chimneys are windows rather than statues in pedimented niches. The entablatures above the pairs of pilasters separating these windows are carved, as is the space between them. String courses in Lefuel's design divide the first floor from the second, and the basement from the ground floor. In the earlier design, they were above and below the first floor, making it very separate. His design also unites ground and first floor by a pattern of horizontal bands and vertical pilasters. In the earlier façade, ground floor and basement were similarly united. Lefuel's basement is unornamented and is separated from the upper floors by a string course. Aware of his imperial patronage, he incorporates the initial N into the carving below the string course that separates the first floor from the second floor. On the second floor, he also inserted the N into the capitals of the pairs of pilasters supporting the pediment. His windows increase in size towards the top of the building, as does the noticeable clarity of the carving. The result is perhaps less top-heavy than on the Pavillon de Flore. The architect also inserted in the curved ceiling the long wished-for skylights, served by the many dormer windows in the sloping roofs. The north side of the Grande Galerie is now known as the Flore wing. It was rebuilt at the same time as, or just before, the Pavillon de Flore. Again, the colossal order was avoided, but the new façade did not follow the design of the south side. There are pediments at the junction of the roof and wall, but they are all curved. The pattern also wrapped itself round the corner onto the east façade of the Tuileries Palace, where there was now one pediment. These pediments contain sculpted groups, all consisting of a central female figure accompanied on both sides by infants. The pediments are separated by balustrades supporting stone urns. There are no chimneys and only one row of dormer windows. Under the pediments, a window is flanked by pairs of pilasters, each crowned with a capital including the initial N. The pilasters frame square bas-reliefs depicting a crouching or seated man, all different. The lintel over these pilasters supports a pair of animals facing a central sculpture different under every pediment. The first floor has the broadest windows. The ground floor has slightly narrower and slightly taller windows. Although the first floor is divided from the second floor by a string course, the two floors were evidently conceived as similar units, and the basement and ground floor are treated together as one unit. Each of these floors, ground and first, has between the windows a statue in a niche flanked by banded pilasters. On the second floor, the pilasters are narrower and shorter, and the space above the niches is decorated with a head within a medallion. On the ground floor and basement level, the pilasters are broader and slightly taller, and the small space between them, above the niche, is filled with abstract decoration. The ground floor windows are still rectangular, but smaller than those above, while the basement windows are square. France declared war on Prussia on July the 19th, 1870. Napoleon III expected a quick victory. On the 2nd of September, the Emperor and over 100,000 of his troops were taken prisoner at the Battle of Sedan. This was the end of the Second Empire. Paris was besieged from September 1870 to January 1871. The Paris Commune, a revolutionary movement, fought against the Versailles government from March to May 1871. On May the 23rd, 1871, incendiary fires were set by 12 members of the Commune at the Tuileries Palace, with petroleum, turpentine and gunpowder. The interiors and roof were completely destroyed, and the palace was left as a lifeless shell. Apart from the Imperial Library, little damage was done to the buildings of the Louvre, and they were not difficult to repair. Although the empire had been overthrown and the Third Republic inaugurated, Hector Lefuel remained the architect of the Louvre. From 1874 to 1879, he restored the Pavillon de Flore, with a new north front where the Tuileries had been. Various rebuildings of the Tuileries were proposed, but the Republican government finally decided, probably on political grounds, to demolish the ruins completely in 1883. Lefuel's north facade follows the pattern of his south riverside facade. The basement and ground floor are identical to those of the south front. The second and third floors on the north side have a statue in the central niche. On the second floor is Prudence by Jules Isidore La France, 1841 to 1881. On the third floor is Law by the same sculptor. On the attic story, where the south façade has Carpeau's sculpture of Flora, the north façade has a similar sculpture by Tony Noël, 1845 to 1909. Unlike on the south and west façades, the sculptures over the circular windows on the north side do not carry the initial N. Over the pediment, the sculptural group of two river deities, male and female, each with paddle and urn, is by Jules Franceschi, 1825 to 1893. The chimney, which rises behind the pediment sculptures, shows us its broad side, which is, strangely, emblazoned with the initial N. Another fire engulfed the Pavillon de Flore in 1880. It seems to have been only a temporary setback. The pavilion served as government offices. The building became officially part of the Museum of the Louvre only in 1961. At present, it does not serve as a public exhibition space and is not accessible to museum visitors. It contains administrative offices and research facilities. It also includes an apartment for the director of the museum. Only the exterior is part of the museum experience.